Without further ado, we'll get this going. Welcome everyone to the second forum that the Zoning Bylaw Committee is presenting regarding upcoming edits to the zoning bylaw. My name is Tom Callahan. I'm chairman of the Zoning Bylaw Committee on the Planning Board. And tonight, the focus of our forum is going to be on housing and specifically diversity of housing and multifamily housing. And then, of course, we'll be looking at what we can do with zoning to address those issues. We're going to have three presentations tonight. They're all going to go back to back, and we're going to save all questions and answers for the end, please. Our first presentation is going to be by our Town Director of Planning, Lauren Lind. She is going to speak to us about all the state laws that affect housing and state mandates as well. Give us some updates on our 40B status and talk about those different laws. And also with us tonight is Lydia Slocum from MAPC, who's also here to answer questions on those topics. We're next going to hear then from Paul Kearse and Mary Hines from our Affordable Housing Steering Committee. They are going to give us the executive summary of the town's housing production plan, which I believe was all approved in 2020. And then finally, last but not least, we'll have Woody Chittick from our chair of our Zoning Board of Appeals, who's going to speak to us about our affordable dwelling unit bylaw, which does exist, but is underutilized. And we're going to talk about the issues with that bylaw and what improvements and changes might be made to make it more widely used. So without further ado, again, please leave all your questions and comments to the end. Apologize for the technical difficulties, but our geniuses have figured it out, I'm sure. But those of you who are on Zoom, if you're having any problems, send a chat, a question, or however you communicate other than by voice, and we'll see if we can address it. So I'll turn it over to Lauren Lind, our Director of Planning.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you everyone for joining us and for your patience this evening with our technical difficulties. These days, these things are never a dull moment. So today I'll be talking about affordable housing explained, as I've termed it, sort of general terms and concepts, talking about Chapter 40B, what that means, and sort of unpacking a high-level view. And then again, the same high-level view of the MBTA multifamily zoning mandate. Can you all hear me okay, by the way? Let me do a screen check here. Yep, okay, great. So I'll just preface this with, I am in no means an expert on housing. What I have done is a lot of research, and I'm going to do what my best intention of, it's sort of like a Cliff Notes, but it's a Lauren Lind Notes of a lot of really complex housing topics. And I'm going to try to just generally summarize it so that you can have a better understanding as these topics come up in our discussion later tonight. Also, there's, like I said, there's a lot of things that can be sort of at times sound similar, but mean different things. So I just want to clarify some maybe terms and misconceptions. First, the first term, which you'll also, if anybody had picked up the flyer on the way out, you'll have these terms in front of you. But the Department of Housing and Community Development is the first that I'll call your attention to. We refer in a lot of things as acronyms in the planning world. So sometimes you can feel like we're talking about alphabet soup and it can be a bit jargony. So DHCD is, when we refer to that, it's the Department of Housing and Community Development. It's the state's branch of all things housing and these state laws and how these items are regulated. The subsidized housing inventory, or SHI, is something you'll commonly hear referred to and when we talk about 40B, Chapter 40B. And what that is housing units with deed restrictions that are for eligible tenants earning specific income limits. What we talk about relative to the SHI most often is at 80% area mean income, another acronym there, AMI, and that is a calculation, again, of income based on different metrics in the area compared to peers. To sum it briefly, Chapter 40B is a state statute that was enacted roughly in the 80s to require all Massachusetts communities to maintain 10% of their overall housing stock as deed-restricted affordable housing that's eligible for inclusion on the SHI. You'll hear terms talking about safe harbor, and what that means is that if you have complied with Chapter 40B and that you have 10% or more of your entire housing stock eligible for inclusion on the SHI, you're considered in safe harbor, which, as I'll get to a little bit bit later, sort of keeps you safe from risks, as some might view it, of comprehensive permitting. In addition, there's other ways that you can get safe harbor. There are temporary ways in which, if you have a housing production plan, there are methods that you can move forward to certify if you have made meaningful, tangible development progress on percentage units in your subsidized housing inventory. I will say, before I get more into the comprehensive permitting aspect, that there is a rental provision of 40B that I think is important to note, that some people can sometimes be perplexed by. At the time when the law was enacted, it was during a time when they were really trying to incentivize the creation of rental housing. So there's a provision that if 25% of the units in an affordable development are actually deed restricted, that because they're rental units, all of the number of units in the total development will count. I'll give you an example. If you have a 20-unit development and only 5 of those are deed restricted affordable, if it's a rental project that meets the other criteria under 40B, you will get a full count for 20 units, even though only 5 of them are actually deed restricted. Your SHI count will be 20 because they're rental. If it was a homeownership project, you would only get 5, and that is because of this rental provision. Comprehensive permitting, as I mentioned earlier, is the permitting process by which you can permit under Chapter 40B, the state law. It starts typically at your local zoning board and ultimately can be appealed up to the Housing Appeals Committee, which is a state organization. And we talk often about sort of friendly or versus unfriendly 40B, which is a comprehensive permit process. Friendly is often, it's locally based. It's a local initiative program. It's a common program. What it is it's a developer and a community partner together and work within the state, the confines of the program to make sure that an application has preliminary review by the state and meets the program criteria before proceeding to the local zoning board to proceed with a project, versus an unfriendly, where is what you see when you're not in a community that's in safe harbor. You can then have a development come in that may supersede local zoning requirements and different sort of metrics that the town, it cannot, they don't get to the first say at partnering whether that application goes in. It can go into the state if you're not in safe harbor. That's where the safe harbor piece really comes into play. I'll get more into the SHI in my next slide, but first I just want to get into the terms of big A versus little a affordable. You'll see capital A affordable is what's referred to as actual deed restricted housing eligible for inclusion on the subsidized housing inventory, versus little a affordable, which is just the general concept of affordability, and it can be more naturally occurring units. We'll talk a lot more about a type that's accessory dwelling units, but it's things that may not necessarily have a deed restriction with them, but would be more of an affordable alternative to what is your typical market domination, which in our town is single-family home ownership. Lastly, I'll just wrap up with 2 more, numbers and letters that you may hear about. 40R is another state sort of base provision. It's a smart growth overlay zoning district, and what that was is an intent to encourage smart growth development and set out best practices and guidelines so that communities throughout the Commonwealth could follow this program and enable these smart growth districts. I want to highlight your attention as we talk more about zoning solutions, because 40R is oftentimes a good solution when we look at multifamily and looking at different housing typologies and thinking about mixed development and mixed growth. 40S then goes hand in hand with 40R because it's a provision that goes along with the 40R zoning that allows additional state school funding that will offset costs of increased demand on school systems from school-age children that are a product of increased development in the 40R district. So next I'll move on to more details about the subsidized housing inventory. As I discussed earlier, a municipality's subsidized housing inventory is the percentage determined by dividing the number of total Chapter 40B affordable units, which are eligible for inclusion on the SHI, by the total number of year-round housing units. And they use that bottom figure that's calculated by the most recent decennial census. So it's interesting because every 10 years you get an update to this bottom figure, and that's what's calculated to use the safe, the 10%. However, the top number always gets updated every 2 years. So you can continue to make progress and input more units as they're eligible onto your SHI over 10 years and move that needle up. And your bottom number will not be recalculated until you get the next decennial census. The 2010 census figures, which is the most current data figure that we have for the SHI right now, is if you see we have 307 units that are eligible on our SHI. We had 2,898 total units at the 2010 census. So our SHI currently today is 10.6. So we are in safe harbor. We have known that as of studying our housing production plan throughout the, doing data as of, mid 2016 and on, that we would be anticipating a shortage. At the time when we were projecting, we were looking at potentially about 25 units. It was hard to say. The thing about the census is that in addition to the decennial census, they release data sets every couple of years. There's the American Community Survey where you can get rough projection estimates, so you can kind of track as to what you might project forward. So we knew we'd be about 25 units short. Now, what I'll flag for you is this little star of an asterisk. Even though we're in 2022, the 2020 census figures have not been finalized. The figures, we have projections out, but not the accurate final count of the unit numbers that are used for the SHI. So as a result, we're still using 2010 census figures for our current count right now. So we are in this sort of gray area of until that 2020 census is finalized, released, and then has time to get vetted by DHCD and the SHI is updated. We're in this little gray area where we're waiting for that final number so we're still in safe harbor now. As we project using the number that's 3,341, and I'll get to that in my next slide again, but this is a data figure that the state is now using as our 2020 count. So using that figure, using our 307, we can anticipate that will fall to 9.2 when those figures do get updated. And if you do the math on that, you're actually looking at a count of 28 units short. The silver lining here is that if you look at the units in the pipeline, these are all actual developments that are in some level of approval or preliminary permitting process with the town. And these all encompass, on the side there is the unit count is SHI eligible units. So we have somewhere in the ballpark of 45 SHI eligible units that are some stage of permitting level. Some are imminent. For example, the Cushing Road units, we're waiting for paperwork to be finalized, and we'll see that 4 units then get added into the 307 count. So we're making progress, and I want to bring your attention back to the temporary safe harbor, that with our housing production plan, there is a potential that as we make this progress and we make meaningful increases in our percentages, that we can then go back, seek certification of that plan, and then depending on that progress at the time, make either a 1 to 2 year temporary safe harbor. So this is a potential path that we have. And that's all I have on that one for now. And the next one I want to call your attention to is the next major state zoning thing about, or I should say about housing that has been a buzz lately. And that is the MBTA multifamily zoning state mandate. It's really Mass General Law, Chapter 40A. You hear it referred to a lot as Section 3A. It can be a little confusing because as an acronym, often we hear 3A referenced. In this context, we're not talking about the state highway corridor. We're talking about just the general law. It is a new regulation. It's part of the overall Housing Choice Economic Development Bill that was passed in 2021. It requires MBTA communities to have a zoning district of at least one reasonable size, which we'll get into the criteria, that multifamily housing is permitted as of right. That means that there is no special permit criteria. You don't go to the planning board or zoning board. You are eligible by right to have that building permit. You can do site plan review, which I'll get more into in a bit, but it really is trying to ease restrictions around multifamily housing development. The failure to comply with the law makes a community ineligible for certain state funds. They list 3 specifically right now, but they're sort of hinting at that they will continue to make DHCD will be allowed to use this as a discretionary factor when awarding state grant funding moving forward. I'll pause for a minute before we get into the details about how this impacts us and discuss first why multifamily zoning is important to sort of answer the question of why is the state doing this. Multifamily zoning near transit and neighboring communities is important because the state has declared that the state is in a housing crisis. Massachusetts has among the highest and fastest growing home prices and rents and out of many of the states in the nation. Rising costs have dramatically increased financial pressures on particularly low and middle income families, forcing them to sacrifice other priorities to pay housing costs. It's a primary driver of homelessness, and it's a disadvantage to our community as we compete against peer states because you risk future job growth looking to go outside of the state. I mean, particularly if you think about right now in the pandemic, the amount of people who can work remotely, why are you going to stay in this area and pay rent that's double the cost of somewhere in another state where if you're working the same? So how does zoning for multifamily help the housing crisis? There really is a lack of multifamily housing in the area if you look at the data and the studies, and the lack of zoning is a barrier. There's been a lot of research that's shown that there generally across the Commonwealth is a trend towards single-family housing development. By allowing particularly multifamily near transit and creating walkable neighborhoods, it's not just good housing policy, but it's better for climate, transportation, and it's sort of better for socioeconomic fabric in general. It's, looking at houses closer to the place we go, looking at areas that can commonly sort of interact with one another, housing, jobs, schools, restaurants, you name it, and providing better access to people and reducing single occupancy vehicle trips, et cetera. There's a lot of good reason and cause as to the intent of what's going on here, but now I'll get into the regulations summarized, and we'll go from there. So as I mentioned earlier, multifamily housing as of right, you can allow site plan review, but if you think of site plan review, I like to, in a very similar essence, look at site plan review is not looking as to whether you can or can't do something, it's how you're going to do it, how you're going to circulate it, make sure that you're reducing light impact on the on adjacent properties, buffering it and screening, but you really can't use site plan review to deny a project that's allowed. You can't impose conditions that make it totally unreasonable to move forward. This zoning particularly cannot be age restriction, so you can't have it all be senior housing. That's not something they're encouraging here. And then in addition, it must be suitable for families with children. They go further to say that you cannot place any limits on size of units, number of bedrooms, size of bedrooms, etc. Then they go into reasonable size and density criteria. There's a lot of information here, and I'm not going to go into all of it because it gets very technical, and really, it's suffice to say that there's a lot of overlapping criteria. You have to have a certain amount of minimum acres. They look at developable area. Originally, the intent was to try to create developable station area within a half a mile of the MBTA commuter rail station. But as they initially put out draft regulations, they got a lot of feedback from communities like us who all of our, a lot of our developable station area is not feasible. So they've flex the guidance, and now, as you'll see, they sort of break it down per different criteria for each of these communities based on developable station area, how big your whole calculate that we have to have a district that's a minimum area. Are we not? Oh, okay. Okay. Anyway, sorry, y'all. So per the calculations, the regulations state that we would need a minimum land area of a district that's 43 acres. It doesn't have to be a contiguous 43-acre parcel, but of those 43 acres, you have to have a minimum multifamily unit capacity of 638 units. If you do the math, that's actually more than 15%. And I thought to myself that there must be a mistake, but the triggering criteria is because it's, in addition, you have to have 15 units per acre of gross density. So it's whichever is more. So if you do that math, that is why they get to 638. And then in addition, only 20% of that district needs to be actually within the half-mile radius area. So if you look at the map on the screen, you'll see that yellow line roughly is the half-mile radius around the MBTA station. So looking at that developable station area, they've already taken a look and have said, it's infeasible to imagine that you would put more than 20% of this 43-acre minimum area beyond this, so you must include 20% in this circle. However, we'll let you put the remaining 80% where you feel is suitable. So the question then for us becomes a couple of things. First of all, we know in order to achieve this compliance, zoning amendments will be necessary to do this. First and foremost, we don't allow multifamily by right in any district. So to do this compliance, that's one facet that needs to be addressed. And then the other thing that you start to think about is the minimum land area. You need to expand beyond that radius to where there are a lot of, there's data that we'll talk about more in the housing production plan that points to sort of what might be some feasible locations. Like if you potentially think about the 3A corridor, looking at, potentially doing zoning there, you can look at 40R as these sort of smart growth hubs. But ultimately, you do need to think about what are your sidewalk and accessibility challenges? What are your water and wastewater capacity limitations? To some degree, you can, require that, private development does have to do certain things on site if we don't have the capacity on a town. But of course, there's always risk there. We've seen instances in town, an example where there's been an on-site system that has failed and they need to, emergency connect to services. So these are things just to be mindful of as we think about this sort of scale change of a community as we think about this. Just thinking about the impacted forecast population growth also on public services. And that's, thinking about police, fire, ambulatory services, school, and education. So these are a lot of things to think about. But I just want to remind everybody that while a lot of these things are scary, that ultimately there are some justifiable causes as to why they are suggesting that we go this way. There are a lot of, I think, examples that you'll hear about what we hear tonight as to what, there is to some degree, I believe, a housing crisis. If you think families downsizing, returning, young adults trying to move in and, looking at housing typology. So try to think as we get to the Q&A session, I would want to, as you start to brainstorm, if you had to look at an area that you would suggest a type of development, where would you think, what would you say? And, reactions to this, do you, when we initially reviewed the draft guidelines that were a little more sort of harsh than these guidelines, we got feedback from the community that was really sort of a stoplight. There was people who was adamantly opposed to any sort of this development. There were people who thought, these are, unreasonable as they're, the guidelines are drafted, but we need to do something. And then there were people who said, this is awesome, bring it in. So we're really looking to have a community with a dialogue with all of you. And of course, this won't be the last, but just start to think about if you had to look, 20 years down the road and you wanted to put more housing somewhere, where would you do it? Or would you not, and that's fine too. So let's just think about that. And we're going to hear more now from our Affordable Housing Steering Committee. So now I'll introduce Paul Kearse and Mary Hines, and they're going to review the housing production plan. And that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Kearse from the Affordable Housing Steering Committee. I am the current chairman. Wanted to, I know this, I have a different slide presentation, but on our housing production plan, we had started probably about, I think we're going on our 7th year, in which the select board had set up a affordable housing steering committee. And we're a steering committee that our charter basically is to take a look at our compliance with 40B. First of all, we spent the first couple of years finding out where we are with our housing stock, and then understanding what the next steps would be to getting some compliance under our belt. So the next step was coming up with a housing production plan. So we did get a grant that came through the master planning group, in which we were able to get the housing production plan funding for, and we worked in parallel with master planning group on putting this together. So a lot of what we've done is we started with a baseline of, what is a housing production plan and where do we need to go. So the state does provide, guidelines of where you need to be, what should be in a plan, what doesn't need to be in a plan. So after we digested all of that, we started our process with our steering committee. And a lot of what we had to do was really come up with some strategy, work with the folks in the community. We had a number of public forums to find out what people are looking for, what are the needs that come from the community, and how it might fit into our production plan here in Cohasset, not necessarily the template that they have for everyone in the state. So a lot of it, we took a look at what our current needs are, and we all understood that we had a lot of needs for affordable housing here. Really focusing on senior housing, affordable housing, and what type of development constraints there might be. The affordable housing goals we had to set to see what's realistic. Their goal was really to try and get to our 10%, and what was that number we needed to get to. And then once we came up with a plan with these goals in mind, we had to implement our strategy. So early on, we identified a lot of projects that were in play, and that was starting from when we were on slide 7. You don't have to go to slide 7, but in our housing production plan, there was a lot of things that were already in process. So one of them being CJC, which everyone knows as the Stop and Shop Plaza. And those are apartments. So we get to count all 20 of those units, even though there's a few that are actually deeded affordable, we get to count all 20. So that was really the one thing that kind of drove us to get to our 10% housing stock. So we really focused on helping get that process underway. And since then, a number of other folks have come to us to say, okay, we're looking at affordable housing, where can we go? So the Cushing Road, which is the 4 units underway, that came to us through the Harbor Project. They needed to put in 3 units. They offered to do 4 off-site. So that's how that came about. 1 Pleasant Street is 14 units. That's behind the barber shop or the South Shore Art Center. That, as you know, if you've seen it, has already been torn down, and that's under construction now. There's going to be 14 apartments on the 2nd floor and retail on the 1st floor. So that is underway. On South Main Street, across from where St. Anthony's Church is, the garage that had burnt down there, they're rebuilding that site. The gentleman that owns that property is not required to put any units in at all under our bylaws, but has offered to make 3 of those units affordable housing. So it's a really appreciative that he really wanted to work to get something affordable here in town. 55 South Main Street, that's the old gas station, as we all know it. We have it down as 2 units because it appears to be 12 condominiums, which only 2 would count. If they go to 12 apartments, we get to count all 12 of those. So that's still in the planning stages. And the last one is 808 Jerusalem Road, which is all the way at the end of Jerusalem Road and Hull Street. So that's where the old antique store burnt down. That property had been out for bid and was awarded to Habitat for Humanity. So there's going to be a 2-family home that is put there. So that'll give you an idea of what we've been working on and part of our housing production plan. So I'm going to have Mary speak to the slides that we had here on senior housing, workforce housing. Most of what we have here, veterans housing, we looked at affordable housing. All of those come into play. Mary, if you want to address those. Mary Hines is our vice chair.
So in the production plan, we looked at the various kinds of properties that we need to encourage for housing. So again, senior housing, there's not a lot that's either not more luxurious, or that we have the housing development behind the police station, but we don't have a lot of mid-range options for seniors. So that's one we're looking at, including smaller, more affordable housings, workforce housing for moderate income households. Those, we're hoping that people like firefighters and teachers and people who may not be able to afford some of our more exclusive homes could have options that work for them. Veterans, we've looked at veterans housing for a long time, and there's various places around the country that do have specific projects. So that's certainly something we find important. And again, we need to increase just overall supply of affordable housing for low-income people, because we don't have much available. What we have is very competitive for people to try to get in there, and it's hard not to have places for people who grow up here and want to stay here, but don't have huge incomes. The next one, good. So one of our goals is to reach safe harbor through our certification. The HPP allows us to sort of buy some time before we produce everything we need. I think the HPP process was pretty good. We looked at again, various options, what our needs. It's a typical planning study. You look at your needs, you look at your available supply, and then you come up with goals and a production plan. So hopefully we're looking at safe harbor for a bit, because we did the HPP. I think I just heard that it's about a 5-year window that we have to move forward towards meeting our goals. And then the other piece of it is to maintain our 10% deed restricted affordable units. And it's some developments don't want to choose to have the affordable units in their particular property, but are willing to purchase a deed restriction in somewhere else in town that make it more feasible for them financially to provide affordable housing, but not necessarily have to include it in their particular development. So these are some of our priority strategies. We're looking to continue to involve other nonprofit developers. The Habitat for Humanity is working on 808 Jerusalem Road, and again, Cohasset as a town is not in the business of building houses, or building properties. So what we try to do is associate with other nonprofits who are in that business and help them with finding properties, finding assistance, and so forth. CPA is a god. To me, it's a god. As someone who grew up here, it's a godsend that's helped move a lot of important projects along over the years. So the Affordable Housing Trust, there's a fund that can receive this money and then disperse it to various projects that we're supporting. We've looked at cottage-style housing, which is sort of a little, you think of a little bungalow. I've seen ads for a place in Maine, I think in Arundel, Maine, that has smaller houses, the tiny house movement. And so that would be something that might work here for seniors or single people and so forth. Not so much for families maybe, but being able to have more dense developments with small places what might help produce more availability for people. Obviously, we're going to use every dime we can get from the state, and we seek it out, and it's an important source of funding for affordable housing. That the state does have a lot of interest in making sure that housing is affordable, and particularly in communities like ours, where they know that a lot of people can't afford to live here. Like more denser housing types, this always sort of scares people who are used to large lots. But it's really the only way that we're going to get housing for people. We can't, it's just not affordable to have affordable housing on, 1 acre lots everywhere. So it's important for us to look at the options for that. Aging at home, obviously people want to live in their house hopefully till the end. And there are ways to help with that. There's the CARES program that helps put in grab bars and those kinds of things that help people stay where they want to stay in their homes and live there forever. And I think we need to look better at mixed uses on Route 3A. I think economic development is only going to happen there. There's really not a lot of other places in town that can accommodate any large economic projects. And I think that's not me. Thank you.
Hello there, I'm Woody Chittick. I'm chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So I'm not, I guess I was half a year ago on the zoning bylaw working group. But I want to talk a little bit tonight about the accessory dwelling units. We're not involved as a zoning board in housing writ large. That's the affordable housing group here. But the ADU bylaw does fall under our purview. And I just to sort of, again, reorient ourselves, we've got to understand that the median home price in Cohasset is almost tripled in the last 10 to 12 years, or last 20 years rather. And the biggest change that we've experienced, as you all know as citizens, is more single-family homes. You know, the median price here in 2022 is 1.3 million, but a new house that's being built, believe me, is going for $2.5 million right out of the gate. And that's not, I think it's certainly not affordable housing, but it's also not good for the character of the town, I believe. So that we are becoming a very exclusive town. This is not a surprise to anybody at all. And so I'm interested in taking a look at what we can do, what, if you will, arrows are in our quiver to kind of offset some of these trends. And as I say, the other kind of disappointing statistic is that since 2010, the moderately priced housing has declined about 20% in terms of total units, whereas single-family building permits have doubled each year. I don't mean cumulatively, but back in 2010 and before, we were averaging about 10 building permits a year. We're now averaging 20 plus building permits a year, and these are all big, nice, expensive homes, which seems to run rather counter to the need to have a diverse populace, I think, and one of the things we can do is to supply, I think, more moderately priced housing. Now, the master plan itself, which was completed a couple of years ago, really singled out four kinds of, and we've heard tonight mention of these, I think, but let me just go over them again. Moderate income. The accessory dwelling unit bylaw is not affordable housing, it's moderate housing. And because we don't have much moderate housing either in town, let alone affordable. And I think all these are worthy. But certainly seniors, the aging in place trend is picking up steam. Yes, there are still retirement homes of various types, all the way to assisted living and nursing homes. But more and more seniors are interested in aging in place. One of the problems is that if you're living in a rather nice colonial house and the kids have gone and so on and so forth, you don't really need 4 or 5 bedrooms to rattle around in. So aging in place comes with some economic and I think physical impediments. So that's one thing that we are looking at. Secondly, young families. I don't know if there's a starter home left in Cohasset. I'm kind of being a little jocular there, but there aren't very many starter home opportunities in Cohasset anymore for young people. And then, of course, there are, as I mentioned, about seniors aging in place, but also empty nesters. A lot of people just don't need, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 square feet of living space. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just too much to keep up with. And lastly, it was mentioned by the affordable presentation, is that we have a lot of public civic employees who really can't afford to live in this town. And these are not people making $20,000 and $30,000 a year. They're people who are making $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year. And they still can't afford to live in town. So we're really at a crunch point. And ADUs, accessory dwelling units, have been promoted as a partial solution. It's not everything, it's not perfect, but it is starting to get at this. So that's the good news. Now, let me explain what an ADU is. I hate to use acronyms, and I'll explain the problem that Cohasset has with its ADU bylaw. First of all, the way it's written, and it doesn't have to be written this way, it's in an existing single-family home. You can't have it can't be detached. You certainly are not allowed to have 2 dwellings on the same lot, but you can't even have what used to be called a mother-in-law's apartment, maybe over the garage or the barn or something of that sort. So it has to be in a single-family home, and it's secondary in size, smaller in size than the principal dwelling unit. Okay, so you've got the main living quarters, and then you've got a smaller accessory quarters. The owner has to be in residence. You can't have absentee ownership. And so that is, okay. I mean, that's the way the bylaw is written. You can only have one ADU per house. Okay, so that would prevent, the way it's written, converting a house and having it be just a gigantic apartment structure, or maybe not so gigantic. And the other restriction is that it has to be in the living and sleeping area of the house. It can't be in a laundry. It can't be in a workshop. It can't be in a studio. It can't be in an attached ancillary of some ancillary use, maybe an attached garage. So basically, it's a single-family home, a smaller unit than the principal one. Owner has to be there living. You can only have one of these, and it's got to be in the existing living quarters. Okay. But let me tell you something about the ADU law. It's been in effect 20 years, 2002. And with our 3,300 housing stock, I've heard we've had one application in 20 years. Not one per year, one in 20 years. That tells me, A, the bylaw isn't working, and what is wrong with the bylaw? Now, I'm not up here to say we've got to reform the bylaw, but I am up here to get input, both live here tonight and elsewhere, because to my mind, you either make a bylaw work or you get rid of it. It's just not, it's not doing what it was supposed to do. And what are the restrictions? I've come up with about 8 there. The first of all is that in order to do a conversion, you have to apply to our board, the zoning board, for a special permit. Well, there are filing fees. That's not punitive, but you probably ought to have a lawyer with you, and that is going to cost you, upwards of 4 figures, high 3s to 4 figures. So it's expensive for some people. And also, you can't modify an attached non-living quarters as maybe an artist's studio or a workshop, which is no longer being used, would be ideal to convert into a second dwelling unit, but you can't do it. Thirdly, you can't have the ADU in some detached building. Now, many towns allow ADUs, let's say above a garage, convert the second story of a garage or something, and perfectly fine. In fact, that's attractive to a lot of people who don't really want to be climbing over the kids or whoever's living in the main house. But you have to wait 10 years before you can convert a new dwelling into having an ADU. Well, circumstances may change. Maybe somebody plans on living a full, long life in a new house they've built. Maybe it's a downsized house, and all of a sudden health problems occur, unforeseen, and they would really like to downsize and have something much more accessible to them. Can't do it for the first 10 years. And the other thing is that the ADs are attached to whoever owns the house. If I own the house and get a special permit, it travels with me. If I want to retire and move out of town or go someplace else, the whole ADU is now thrown back to the zoning board and the new owner. They have to apply all over again. It could be, I think we're a kindly board, but you wouldn't want to have an expensive conversion so much up in the air, I think. I think that worries people. The other thing that I was kind of unaware of for a long while is the 6th bullet down there. Our bylaw, the way it's written, prevents having a separate outside entrance. You have to use whatever the entrance is. So again, I guess it's fine if it's a family where you have parents and children, living there of different age groups. But if you wanted a little privacy to come and go on your own, you can't do it. You can't have a patio. You can't have a deck. You can't make any exterior changes other than what's required by building code. And it also sets a maximum floor area of 900 square feet, which may seem fine. I mean, some certainly apartments downtown and elsewhere are 750-foot minimums. But 900 square feet is not necessarily fine for a couple that's downsizing a bit, but doesn't want to sort of live in a kind of a 1-bedroom or 1.5-bedroom unit. And also, the last thing, and I think this is should be corrected regardless, is that certain access and mobility features, such as ramps, we see them a lot, are not by right. They have to, again, come to the zoning board and apply for a special permit. Okay, but it's just more red tape. I mean, it's not necessarily beneficial. But you take all those things together, you may not check off all 8, but 3 or 4 or 5 of those are going to be kind of non-starters. And when they accumulate, you say, I'm not going to apply for an accessory dwelling unit because it's too burdensome. And there's a second reason why I'm not going to apply. If we could go to the next slide. Our bylaw already exempts about half our housing stock from needing special permits to convert from a 1-family dwelling to a 2-family dwelling. You can convert if you have a slightly larger lot, a third larger than the district minimums. You can do it by right. You don't have to come to my board. And frankly, that's good with me. You know, so I think that the other part of that is that if your existing house preceded the zoning bylaws, which were passed in 1955, in other words, an older than 1955 house, again, you can do it by right, even if you don't have a large enough lot size. And of course, almost 50%, 45% at least by last count, of Cohasset houses were built before 1955. So you have, on one hand, an expensive process, lots of red tape, I can't do this, I can't do that, and you have this, you can do it by right. You don't need the zoning board's permission. Well, guess what? I think we could go to the next one. It's simpler. There are no construction restrictions. You can have a separate entrance if you do that conversion. It's permanent. It travels with the property, not with me as an owner. We have at least 100 to 200 of these conversions. They're quasi, they are accessory dwelling units. They're not quasi, they're accessory dwelling units that did not have to go through the zoning bylaw process. And they're basically unregulated except for meeting building codes if they notify everybody and so on and so forth. So it isn't to say that ADUs, and hold on to this one for a minute, I'm going to keep it there for a bit. It's not to say that ADUs are bad, but as I said earlier on, they're not working. But they can play a role where these by right conversions can apply. Maybe the house was built in 1965 and not 1955. So it's not a by right, but it's still a good idea. So if the bylaw were changed and designed to be user-friendly, if you will, that is a good thing. And again, might cost a little money, but at least you can do a conversion, whereas right now, at least that's illegal. And what we're finding is that the kind of noise, the chatter around this really is our families that are in transition. And they're working singles. But the in transition part is that maybe the kids are coming back, have graduated from college, or somebody's gotten married and needs to build up a nest egg, needs to look around the area, and would like to settle in Cohasset or the environs. And so they're going to take on occupancy of this little ADU unit for a year or two or so. Or maybe mom and dad are going to want to downsize and frankly want to live in the smaller of the 2 units because they just don't need all the space. But it is comforting to know that there's younger people, and as I say, maybe a working single, but it doesn't have to be a relative, but somebody who's kind of get their eye out for them. So, so I would advocate one of 2 things. We can go to the next if you'd like. Are we doing enough to just let people know that there is such a thing as an accessory dwelling unit? And there are also something called a by right conversion that many, many people can take advantage of. So you don't have to leave Cohasset. You don't have to sell your house necessarily if you feel like downsizing. Now, I've phrased these as questions. The second one being, well, should we fix the present ADU article to remove most of the restrictions on property owners? It's not a slam dunk. If you're in a little neighborhood or a small house, maybe you don't want to have a whole bunch of 2-family houses. I can't answer that question for individuals, but I will say the present bylaw does not work. And the third question is a question I always ask myself when I look at bylaws and would urge you as citizens, regardless of whether this is ADU or the number of parking spaces you need somewhere or the height of a building, should we leave well enough alone? Is this a solution looking for a problem? In this case, I don't think so, but I don't want to presuppose. I'm sure there are some people who think ADUs are great and some that think they're a horrible thing. All I can tell you is that we've got an ADU bylaw that is not working, and my advocacy would be either fix it or get rid of it. But there you go.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone who presented. My name is Christian Brandt. Some of you might remember me from our last meeting in October. I am the Community Engagement Manager at MAPC, and the town has asked me to help facilitate the Q&A for these 3 meetings. So we obviously got started a little late, and so for the Q&A portion, I just want to really quickly say that I'll try to get my best to sort of facilitate questions happening for the panel to ask. But as you're asking your question, I ask that you try to be as pithy as you can be, and I will help you accomplish that as well. So if I might interrupt and ask you to sort of move on with the point that you're trying to make. It's not because I don't want you to ask your question, but I do want everyone to be able to ask the question that they have in the time that we have remaining. The only other thing I'll just mention is that I'm going to try my best to alternate between in-person folks and Zoom folks. So I will call on you from the in-person group, and then I will just ask that you use this microphone to speak into so that the folks on Zoom can hear you, because otherwise you'll have to speak into this microphone here. So I'm going to move this into the center of the room, and then we'll go from there. So if anyone has a question on Zoom, please feel free to raise your hand, or anyone in the audience, if you raise your hand, I will also just call on you.
I knew it late, you'd break the ice.
Lee Jenkins, Jerusalem Road. Just like clarification of a couple of things. The ineligibility for state funds, talking about 600 before if we didn't do this. That's number one. The other one is for a 40S provision. How long would the state funds for schools be there? Or would it just be a 1 year or 2 year? With the special needs, they came up with this whole big package and they dropped half the money out. I just like to know if anybody knows.
You can take that.
First one.
You can speak to this.
Oh, I know this one. So hi, everyone. Hi to those on Zoom. My name's Lydia Slocum. So as was mentioned at the beginning, I work at Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC. My colleague Alexis actually worked on the housing production plan, but I was asked, happy to answer questions as they relate to state things or sort of across the region housing questions. So the question related to the MBTA communities and what the state funding are that are sort of tied, like what's the carrot and stick side of that. So housing choice funding and MassWorks funding, and there is a third one that has totally slipped my mind, but it's a smaller component. Those are funding programs that municipalities can apply to. MassWorks in particular is a really important source of infrastructure funding. And so MassWorks specifically is funding that communities can apply for infrastructure, road improvements, sewer, water improvements, things like that, that help support new housing development. So those are the funding sources. As Lauren mentioned at the beginning, the state has sort of in their pocket, and they haven't, yet made any decisions if there's going to be additional funding sources or how communities' compliance with the MBTA communities program might factor into sort of other funding that the town might be seeking in the future. But we don't know at that point. That's all 40S, I will have to follow up. I actually don't know. But so I don't know if Lauren, if you could speak to that. Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. We'll have to follow up with you on that one.
Great, Elizabeth, it's all you.
Yeah, hi, Mark Dunn here. Computer.
The artist formerly known as Elizabeth, yes. It's all you, go ahead.
Thanks. First, thank you for fixing the technical issues, and we felt guilty having everybody wait for us. Second, much appreciated all the work the Affordable Housing Committee has done. And then specifically, I'd like to comment on the ADUs and the as of right units. I don't think people really know about the as of right units. And I think more publication about that would be very valuable. And on the ADUs, I mean, obviously we're all here because there's a housing need and a crisis, across the country. And certainly we'd love to have our kids move back to Cohasset, which, as Woody mentioned, kind of costs $2.5 million for a new house, which is unlikely. So I think expanding or revising the ADU bylaw would be very valuable to let people age in place, et cetera. So that's my comment. Thank you.
And Mark, actually, I think I forgot to have you tell us your address in addition to your name.
Sure.
For the record.
21 Beach.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other folks in person have questions? Yes. It's long.
I'm sorry I'm late. I thought it was starting at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
But anyway, my name is Wayne Sockchuck, 432 Beechwood Street. And the example that was given here about two-family houses and stuff, when I was born in Cohasset, my parents lived here. I went and got married, and then I wasn't going to live in my parents' house, and so I was able to find an apartment on South Main Street above the house with a separate entrance, because I wanted to buy a house, but you can't just get married, go out in the street, and then find a house in those days. So we saved our money together, and I spent $34,500 for my first house in Cohasset, and it came fortunately with an extra lot of land. So times have changed since 1973. So, but I want to talk favorably about the two-family conversions and how important they really are, because I now live at 432 Beechwood Street in front of Wheelwright Farm, and there are probably 7 or 8 houses that were built 200 years ago, 150 years ago, as two-family houses. And the original families, some have they have been there for 100 years, like the Bateses and those people. So, and generally speaking, there's a working class family or person. There's a carpenter across the street in one of them. There's someone else that's elderly couple in another one. And so they are really needed in the town if we want to have places for people to live. I did Wheelwright Farm condominiums as a project. And lately I've been talking to them a little bit about, or they've been talking to me and saying, is there any way we can add some structures to our community today? And they're thinking about, or can we do something about the people that are at Wheelwright Farm? They're there usually until one of the couple dies. Okay, and now it's really a senior thing. I mean, there are people that are 95 years old and stuff. And so they don't need all the space, but they don't necessarily want to move. So my thought was, can we have a bylaw that says that you can take that, I mean, they're living in a 2,400 square foot, some of them have finished basements, there's a 2-car garage, there's a breezeway. Can they go ahead and convert that 2-car garage into an accessory apartment that maybe they themselves move to, because they're going to eliminate the stairs going up and all the rest of it. The garage is going to go in smoothly. There's enough room in there. All the garages at Wheelwright have significant ceiling structures so that there could be a second floor on it even. So that, or consider, because there are sections that we have, that they have extra lots of land, meaning there's something that was carved out here that we didn't build on, we could call it open space, that a person like myself or someone else could go in and build a multi-family unit, like a fourplex that's strictly for the elderly. It's all, all on one level, that a resident of number 78 could sell their place and could either buy this or go in and rent this and still be in the community that the only thing that they know right now. And so that thought of, can you add multifamily to an already clustered zoning project? So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll look at-
Yeah.
Wayne, we could do the zoning for that, but that particular example and 100 Pond Street and a couple others, they're all condominiums. Your first impediment, your major impediment would be the condominium. All of the owners would have to agree to amend their master deed to allow that to happen, to build more units. I understood from years back that Wheelwright Farm wasn't fully built out, that there was more space. But you'd have to get through that private organization first. The town could certainly, if we approve accessory dwellings as a right, could allow that to happen. But that's the major impediment for those particular examples you were giving, I think.
On Zoom. Great. So there's no hands on Zoom. I'm recalling a question that Lauren asked earlier, which was about the MBTA communities presentation, and that was, I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if I'm wrong, but if you could pick somewhere in town where that type of thing would go, where would you want to see that happen, right?
Right.
Yeah. So if you're thinking about, you're sort of like trying to think through and digest this presentation, which was quite a lot of information, that might be a good prompt to get you started.
Can I just make one point
Please.
about that? Is with that particular mandate coming through the Housing Choice Initiative, we have to zone for this kind of development. We don't necessarily have to build it. It's not a mandate to build 638 units. It's a mandate to allow 638 units to go someplace. So I think it's an important point that we just don't, it's what, a quarter of our housing stock, a third of our housing stock. It would be a lot for us to have to build that, but we do have to at least prepare for it. That's what they're asking us to do.
All right. Mark, I see you have your hand raised. Yes.
It seems the natural location would be around.
If you could just repeat your name and address, sorry.
Sorry, Mark Dunn, 21 Beach. The natural location would seem to be around the transportation, around the train station. So somewhere on 3A, I don't know who owns some of that land around there. And there is some wet land there, but nevertheless, there is, kind of first generation use around there. So that would seem to be a natural location for it.
Thanks, Mark. I know someone else had their hand raised, but I'm wondering if anyone here has a comment or a question before we, yes, please.
Mike Sardina, 100 Pond Street, number 56. Woody, I thought your presentation was quite good. And that bylaw is a mess. I agree with you. I'm 100% for affordable housing or the ADUs. But I think that relative to some of these comments that I had written down earlier today, it could become sort of a, if you really dove into it, it could become kind of a real Pandora's box. For me, understanding the existing accessory building bylaw, it basically is not defined as like living unit, it's defined as something else. Garage, shed, whatever, those kind of things. As far as an affordable ADU unit, I think an ADU unit should be defined as a dwelling and not as an accessory building, which creates a different kind of approach to the whole thing. So it has relationships to setbacks, heights, access, parking, all those things. And I don't know where it goes relative to grandfathering, existing garages, potting sheds, whatever, where it goes relative to the definition of foundations, relative to grandfathering, and knocking down a shed, saying, well, there I have a shed here, so therefore it's a building. But if it doesn't have a permanent foundation or something has to be defined along those lines. Otherwise, there's too many gray areas. I also had a question, I think Lauren mentioned this, or maybe you did. There was 100 to 200 existing ADUs in town that are parts of homes. Are those considered affordable units?
No.
Can they be affordable units? If they're, they're probably all rentals, right?
Well,
Or
yes.
related to rentals, so why can't they be affordable?
Well, if they were affordable, there are 2 to 3 impediments. First of all, in order to be certified, you would have to accept the rent that is determined by the state, and you would have no choice over tenant. You would be assigned a tenant. And I think that probably wouldn't go over too well for some people. So affordable, I think the group is dealing with a wonderful menu of 7, I think I counted 7 or 8 options there. This I would call low to moderate income, but not with the strictures that the state would or has in its enabling law.
It just seems to me that the largest number of units that could be put into this town are ADUs that are affordable. If you can somehow find a way legally to get that redefined, it's maybe worth looking into, because if some of the restrictions are removed that you showed us that didn't seem to make sense, and people are building over garages, or they build a garage with a unit above it, that should be deemed affordable.
So the issue with that currently is that in order for it to count as affordable housing under 40B, property has to be deeded as affordable housing.
Well, let it go with the deed. It's a
So the
deeded
homeowner,
unit.
right, so the homeowner has a in-law apartment as an
Yeah.
ADU.
Let it go with it.
He would have to deed that property. The whole
Understood.
property would have to be deeded in order for it to count.
Well, again, maybe that's some way that a law can be written by the state that allows, ADU to be deeded in perpetuity as affordable, and the home is not. The primary residence is not.
Yes, I'm not an expert on that part of it, but the current laws that are in place. with the
Well,
state,
that's, you know, that's the issue. I mean, we get into all these gray areas that can be, and should be perhaps evaluated at some point.
So
That would benefit the town.
we do have one person with their hand raised on Zoom, but also I think Lydia, did you want to add something about your question, which is a very interesting one?
People here, do I have to go?
I think you should come here, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question about ADUs and, you know, I won't go into like, what should change or not, but I will say there is, you know, there are precedents for communities that you can write into an ADU bylaw or ordinance about an affordability level. So that can be part of, you know, it probably, I don't know that you could go back and change to Paul's point existing, but if you're talking about how to sort of encourage leveraging ADUs as an affordable housing option, like there is a way to do it. It does get tricky, you know, if you think about if someone owns their whole property, if you trying to set a separate deed for an ADU, like you just, you know, people that have bought a house, like there's a lot of paperwork and you'd have to subdivide your home. It's possible. I'm not saying anything is not possible, but it's sort of one of those trade-offs about, you know, are you going to burden or sort of go through a process of trying to deed separate a unit so that you can attach an affordability restriction just to that ADU? Or is someone, you know, maybe there are properties that people are willing to kind of deed restrict an entire property. That's, you know, an option too. So I think there's different ways that you could think about and sort of how do you combine affordability restrictions? Because again, to be included on a subsidized housing inventory, the housing has to actually carry a restriction in its deed that limits the cost over time to an affordable level. So.
Very quick question.
Is it about the ADU?
It has to do with, is there a 20-year period or something when something goes into that, or is it isn't forever, right?
The question was about the length of the deed, correct?
No, the length of the deed restriction.
The deed restriction,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah.
So to be included on the subsidized housing inventory, it has to be at least 30 years of a deed restriction. So it could be longer. There's, you know, low-income housing tax credits. There's programs that have much, much longer, but the 30 years is kind of the minimum. Yeah.
So I want to turn to the person who has their hand raised on Zoom. I do have something to add to the ADU question afterwards, but I want to make sure that we get to all the questions. And also I know we're approaching, I think, over the end of the time that you were supposed to be here. So I appreciate all of you being here. And I see you have a question in the back as well. So I'll go to the person on Zoom first. Mike, it is all yours.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
This is Mike Dick at 27 Parker Ave. Going back to the discussion on the transportation district requirement from the state. Recently, there was a proposal, I believe, for what's called a local improvement project at a parcel adjacent to across the road from the driveway to the Cohasset station. And I believe that project was not supported. And one of the rationales I thought, was that, well, we don't really need this development because we're well within our safe harbor. It's no longer an urgent issue. Please, anybody there, correct me if I've got that wrong, but that's the impression I was left with. And I'm just wondering if anybody there has any insight into that. It seemed to me like a very good solution.
What was the property again?
So
North Main Street across from-
the question was in reference to a local initiative program application that was proposed for 502 North Main Street. That was recently, as I mentioned, the sort of friendly 40B type of comprehensive permitting local initiative program, or a LIP application, is one of those. Recently, there's property owner at 502 North Main Street approached the town with a proposal for a 20-unit apartment complex development at that site. As I mentioned, with the local initiative program application, it needs to be signed off on by the community, the municipality, and the homeowner or the property owner before it proceeds to the state for preliminary eligibility. At the time, the select board actually took a position that because we are in the midst of a comprehensive zoning overhaul and analysis, and we have these things going on, that they wanted to take a position that they were not going to move forward on LIPS right now, given the sort of uncertainty of the criteria and what was moving forward. The other key distinction to make is that regardless of whether or not a development of that capacity were to be developed there, as Tom Callahan highlighted before, it's not what's on the ground that counts, it's what's zoned for. So particularly in the scenario of a property going through a LIP application, you're not changing the underlying zoning. You're overriding the current zoning by going through a comprehensive permit process, so it doesn't actually change that zoning. So even if you developed it there, even though the development may meet the criteria of what the MBTA 3A compliance is trying to do, if the zoning on the ground is not in compliance with their criteria, it doesn't matter. So when they look at zoning and criteria and compliance with this new state law, it really, like, even if you looked at one of the things we've looked at is like the Avalon site, which is now known as the Preserve. You need to look at that as a blank site. It doesn't matter that there's 225 something housing units on it now. It's what you would enable the zoning of that parcel to do in the future. So just a clarification point there.
I'm not sure I understood what you said, Lauren. I'm sorry. It seems that if there is this requirement from the state to provide multifamily housing within a half mile of the station, and that development falls within that zone, I'm not following how that that doesn't help us, doesn't help the town.
I can sort of attempt an answer because I've talked to a bunch of people at work at MAPC at least about this. So I think what Lauren was saying is basically that in order for it to count, it doesn't matter what is built there currently. It just matters the state is going to be looking at the zoning code and what is allowed in the zoning code. So for instance, we were working with a community north of Boston that had a lot of units that were built through a special permit process in their downtown as part of sort of affordable housing push back in like 2010. And because the underlying zoning of those units was actually, it was not by right, it was through special permit, even though it was within the sort of area of the MBTA station, those units wouldn't count towards the MBTA compliance because they're not allowed by right within that area. They were allowed and built by special permit. And so that kind of, there's, Cohasset's not the only community in the region where that is the case. There's a lot of communities that developed apartments and also sort of affordable housing through special permit processes or through 40Bs or something like that without changing the underlying zoning. And so the difference is that the MBTA communities is just looking at zoning and what's allowed to be built, not what is actually built there. Unless the underlying zoning changes in the future to allow us, a certain level of units that would comply with the MBTA Communities Act, then the things that are in that space and are built don't count. It's a little confusing, but does that answer your question, Mike?
It doesn't, because it's zoned residential, but let's move on.
Okay. I think maybe this is a good question for some follow-up. I know that in the back you had a question. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks for the presentations. I'm Teddy Marr from 75 Pleasant Street. I really like some of the data that Lauren's presentation provided. And I was just curious, because you used some of the census numbers, the number of approvals for new residences between 2010, 2020. I was just wondering if there's data that's accessible to us, if you're looking for our input between approvals for single family homes versus multifamily, for 40B versus rentals. I think that would help to color some of the information that you shared with us and to offer some additional data. And then my other, I don't know if that's more of a comment than a question, unless you have that information accessible. And my other thought that I had indirectly relates to the ADUs is I'm not really familiar with the bylaws regarding Airbnbs and how that might impact the use and the intention of ADUs.
There is no bylaw that deals with Airbnbs.
So that the answer to the Airbnb question was that there is no bylaw that deals with Airbnbs at all, or as it relates to ADUs?
Our bylaws are silent on it.
At all.
But we're thinking about it. And Airbnb doesn't really, because it's short term, it doesn't affect the housing count at all. But the question with those is other communities are doing, do we ban them or not?
Yeah.
Right now, it's unstable.
Any Zoom questions? You have a question, yeah?
Did anybody answer the question? I mean, with regard to, what's being built,
yes,
it's obvious that we're building mostly single-family homes. We do not allow multifamily development as of right in the town. Where it's happening, where it is allowed is the village. And a lot of the village development is fairly recent, although the bylaw to allow for it to happen has been around for a while. So the single-family homes are outweighing everything else we're doing. And this goes back to the 2000 census, to the 2010 census. We always felt we were in a little gray area of being like 25 units short, maybe 30. And this is going to keep happening if we're going at the pace of single-family development that was pointed out earlier, because that's the vast majority of what we're doing, and it's accelerated. The acceleration in our growth and the development from 2000 to now is pretty stark. And the previous bylaw working group, we gathered some data on that. I think it was something on the order of 16% more housing units since 2000. Think of that as probably 99, 98% single family housing. We can get out of whack with 40B fairly quickly. And when we're out of whack with it and we're under that 10%, we're vulnerable to a project coming in that we do not like. When Avalon came in with 200 units, that was a big shock for us to have something that big, that quick. And, we managed to weather Avalon. It didn't generate as much children as was originally projected, but we don't want that again. We don't want something of that size coming back in. So it's important for us to follow the plans that we have to try to keep up with that 10% threshold, just because of the way we are developing right now.
I could just follow up.
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks for responding. I think that was the intention of my question actually for the data. So I really appreciate you responding, but I'm not really sure as a citizen what kind of impact I can have on the decisions that are being made for single family homes, multi-family homes, and some of these large issues that the state is imposing. So I think I would like to know, how I can contribute to these decisions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Jack Reed, 23 Cushing Road. I'm a member of the zoning bylaw committee. I'm also on the select board. I have to be very clear that I'm speaking as a citizen, not officially. However, I was originally one of the original affordable housing, and I see my friends there. They've done a great job. We've made a lot of progress. ADUs have the potential to solve a lot of problems. But as we've heard here, issues of once you do it, it's irreversible, you encumber your property forever, questions about the separate entrances, all of these are the kind of the devils of the details. So it's very important that we, as a community, make the decision if this type of solution is where we want to go, and then in the zoning bylaw committee and the other parts of the town. I'm looking at the audience here. I'm also looking at the audience on Zoom, so I'm going back and forth. But anyway, I think it's important that the town knows that the seriousness that this is being addressed, and a lot of these initiatives like the zoning bylaw and the affordable housing, these are the
they're dealing with this. And these are the questions and what's so helpful for everybody to know the details. But I think what we really need to make sure is the community needs to send a strong message that this type of smart reform is where we want to go. Thank you.
Well, sorry, let me check first to see if anyone has their hand raised on Zoom. No, I was too eager, but it's all you. Pardon?
Is there another one?
No, there's no one with their hand raised on Zoom, so it's all you.
Hi, Susan Sardina, 100 Pond Street, and loving living in multifamily units. The question actually, I guess, is for you, Woody, and for anyone else who can add to it. I love the concept of thinking of how families can downsize and have someone in an ADU, have their grown kids who are married and want a place that they can live. The question that comes to my mind, I mean, I would be on the Affordable Housing Steering Committee if I didn't care about affordable housing, and those are just some of the examples. But the question that comes to my mind is that if this now is going to become a unit that is a dwelling, a full-time, not just like an Airbnb, you know, a weekend or a week or 3 weeks or whatever it is, but a really permanent full-time dwelling, should it meet the same setbacks as the primary dwelling? Because it's now a dwelling. So it's the same as the primary residence. I don't know if MAPC has any guidance on that would help, you know, be lent to us to help out. Maybe you can answer that. But, you know, I think it just raises the question if, you know, if you've got certain zones that have whatever the setbacks are for the primary dwelling, and then you're suddenly having something that's much closer proximity, it changes things. So maybe you can address that. Thank you.
Well, you're talking about a detached, a building, right?
Detached, if it's detached, yeah. I mean, like you were mentioning, a artist studio or a garage or whatever it might be, that might be a separate unit, which might have a closer proximity to property lines than what the actual house might have.
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I think that if you change the use, the new use has to comply with relevant bylaws. You can't say, gee, I had a potting shed in the backyard, 100 feet back, and it was 10 feet from the lot line, and now I can build a house there. No, you can't do that. You have to, if you're gonna live in it or have it as a dwelling, you've got to comply.
Yeah.
Is that the accurate?
Yeah.
So it is the use then that determines whether the proximity. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's similar to an earlier comment about that once you start to kind of, if you're going to be sort of embracing ADUs and sort of setting aside a use, in your zoning ordinance, like, yes, MAPC has worked with communities.
Stipulate in the bylaws then that would be, if it becomes a permanent dwelling, that it would abide by the same setbacks. Okay, just wanted to understand.
Yeah, or you can, you could set new sort of dimensional standards for that new use, right? Define it as an accessory dwelling use, and it can be sort of its own. So we've worked with communities to kind of do from a spectrum, tweak an existing to all the way to kind of create something, a whole cloth. And absolutely, I think, as a smart planning practice would be to kind of think through all of those details about, if you're going to be allowing detached ADUs, like you want to make sure that the setbacks are there, that parking and, design guidelines, all of those things.
Just so, we like the idea, but then we don't realize once we get into it, like, ooh, hadn't thought about that, and then, it comes back to bite us. So, okay, thank you.
So I do want to do a quick time check because it is 8:50 something. 53. So we are 23 minutes over our time that we said we were going to be done. So I just want to check quickly with the town folks to see how we're feeling. And I think maybe it seems like maybe we could stick around and answer a few more questions and maybe go till 9 unless anyone doesn't have any additional things to add. And there's no one with hands raised on Zoom, so I'll turn it back to the folks who are here in the audience if you have any additional questions to ask. One thing, since I'm not seeing any additional questions, one thing I just wanted to add quickly about the ADUs is that in addition to being the community engagement manager at MAPC, I also I work with the communities in the North Shore as a sub-regional coordinator. So that means that I basically run a monthly meeting for the planning and municipal staff in the North Shore. And it's kind of like a community of practice. We just get together once a month and talk about the work that we're doing. And one of the things that I recently learned is that one of those communities is considering an approach to ADUs that would incentivize affordable housing without going through the deed restriction process, but it loses the sort of teeth to actually keep it affordable in the future. So essentially, they receive some money from the federal government through something called the American Rescue Plan Act. And one thing that they're considering is using that money as a small grant to provide to homeowners who want to build an ADU so that they can then build that ADU on their property under the condition that the homeowner agrees, not through a deed or anything like that, but agrees to market it at an affordable rate afterwards. And one of the reasons why they're exploring this is because of what the panelists have mentioned about the sort of intensity of going through a deed restriction process with an ADU, separating the deeds from each other, getting it counted on the subsidized housing inventory through the state. It's quite a process. So this is one idea that that MAPC at least has heard about, a sort of more creative approach to that. The downside is that there's no way for the city or the town to enforce that being affordable in the future. And they're not planning to fund any kind of like tracking of that. So there are some serious downsides to that. It sort of relies on the good faith of the owner to keep it at an affordable rent. But that is one way. There's lots of different approaches to ADUs, as we've discovered in this conversation. Closing remarks?
Yeah.
Great.
Great. Thank you, Christian. And thank you to all the panel members for being here tonight. I appreciate your presentations. I hope everyone else did. We will be doing one more forum before the holidays. It'll be Monday, December 5th. Same place, same time, hopefully with no technological issues. The focus of the next one is going to be on environmental issues. We are going to talk about climate change and climate resiliency. The experts in the planning community are already busy away planning for this, writing bylaws, and we'll have probably Lauren and another representative from MAPC to speak to that. We are trying to line up one of our town officials to speak probably more on the science end of it, to see how climate change is projected to possibly impact Cohasset. We will also have one of the members of the planning board and zoning bylaw committee, Clark Brewer, is going to talk about green development, low impact development, other types of more sustainable types of communities. And right now we're also planning to talk about our land alteration bylaw, which we changed over the last couple of years. We put in new provisions about lot clearing and about ledge removal, and want to talk about the way it was written versus the way it was originally written, and whether we switch, how it's worked in the first few permutations of permits we've seen under that. And so that'll be, again, it'll probably be a three-part presentation, and that'll be Monday, December 5th. So I hope everybody can be there for that. And thank you for coming tonight, and thanks for your patience tonight. Appreciate it.